My name is Dara Schaefer. I'm 49 years old and I'm an artist trained as an architect, and I'm also an art consultant here in New York City. My journey into the world of art and architecture started as a child in Montreal, where I grew up. My stepfather had an art gallery, and our home was always filled with art and artists. At the age of 17, I left Montreal to attend the Cooper Union School of Architecture here in New York. My initial attraction to the profession was my somewhat erroneous belief that architecture would be the marriage of my two loves, art and math. And that was long before I had my own children, Jonah, who would graduate from Williams College as a math major, and Ariella, who's currently an art major at School of the Art Institute of Chicago. I had no idea that Cooper Union, under its dean, John Haydick, would be a cultish immersion into the reformation of the pedagogy of architecture. Haydick taught us to regard architectural elements like walls, doors, and windows as a vocabulary invested with emotional content. We were able to absorb these concepts unconsciously as our school was housed in what was at that time his only built work, the foundation building. My own thesis took its inspiration from Lewis Carroll's story, Through the Looking Glass. Carroll was trained as a mathematician, but at the time when his books were written, the field of mathematics was undergoing a reformation of sorts, from the study of rational numbers and theorems to the more convoluted innovations of abstract algebra, imaginary numbers, and non-Euclidean space. The chapters of Through the Looking Glass are actually formatted as a chess problem. White pawn, Alice, to play and win in 11 moves. Each chapter corresponds to one set of chess moves. Carroll's Cartesian chessboard became my sight, and Alice's trajectory through the obstacles she encounters in the story became the basis for drawing the elements of a dwelling at different scales, from keyholes to passages, from doorknobs to doors, and from obstacles to inhabitable domestic spaces. The forms open, glide, and shift, revealing new spaces at new scales. In many ways, Lewis's view of the absurdities of the abstract and irrational world of mathematics during the second half of the 19th century mirror my own experience as a student at Cooper Union at the end of the 20th century. Haydick defied all norms and was one of the first educators to encourage his students to delve into the psychological dimensions of space. After graduating, I spent 3 years working in IMP's office. When my son was born, I began working from home and ultimately started my own architecture practice where I did high-end apartment renovations. About 10 years ago, my practice shifted from architecture to helping my clients build art collections. This shift also coincided with my first ceramics class as a way to overcome what was, in retrospect, an emotional breakdown. Working in a community made me realize how much I actually missed my years of learning and being inspired by my peers in the architecture studio. Working with clay was also centering and healing. Motivated by my own process of recovery, I embarked on a series of emotional landscapes. The continent of love is divided into 3 states: the state of longing, the state of lust, and the state of affection. The continent of fear, shaped like a fetus, is inspired by Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory and is divided into the 3 responses to fear: the state of fight, the state of flight, and the state of freeze. Another early series was inspired by traditional pinch pot vessels. I began to pinch through the clay, and instead of considering them as holes, I imagined them as windows and doors, and as portals into different dimension. I also wanted to untether the vessel from gravity and consider them as habitable spaces. This led to a series of birdhouses. After a few years in the studio, I began to see the porcelain slabs as potential curvilinear walls and roofs. Every third-year architecture student at Cooper does a complete analysis of an architecturally significant building. But as a student, I was dubious of the benefit in copying another architect's work. It just felt like copying. But as I have evolved, I began to appreciate the benefit of recreating a work of genius. By fabricating each piece by hand, one is internalizing the lifetime of research and development that went into its creation. I embarked on my own year-long journey into the construction of a porcelain model of Le Corbusier's Notre-Dame du Haut in Ronchamp. After spending a full year immersed in Le Corbusier, I also began to crave a female source of inspiration. I looked at the Bauhaus, and while most women were relegated to weaving, Marianne Brandt was the head of the metal department, began a series of teapots as an homage to her. Last summer, I spent close to a month at Anderson Ranch, where I participated in Del Harrow's digitally fabricated molds workshop, as well as Jake Weigel's CNC foundry mold making. That was where I immersed myself in Rhino, which allowed me to digitally manipulate mathematical forms inspired by my son's math thesis and knot theory. They became the basis for a new series of chess pieces and sculptural forms. My most recent series of sculptures was inspired by the French ceramicist André Alette Masson. While working on my first piece for that series, I encountered a massive James Turrell sculpture installation. That was the moment I internalized the concept of how light and color can be the catalyst for form to transcend the confines of geometry into the sacred. I'm now at the point in my journey where my work is ready to shift scale. Instead of having architecture inspire my art, I'm ready to re-enter the realm of architecture. In the next few weeks, my family and I will be purchasing a farmhouse where I'll be setting up a new studio in the barns. I will have, for the first time, the freedom to expand the dimensionality of my work. It has taken decades to get there, but while my journey has had a few obstacles, I'm so grateful to feel like I'm at the point where Alice was when she was the pawn, ready to become queen.